All right, today I wanted to talk about Pacific Rim, which is a movie, came out, an action adventure, well, not an adventure, sci-fi action movie that came out, I think it was 2017, 2019, thereabouts. Essentially, the idea is kind of more of an Americanized version of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Kind of from there, very much an American take on this, where essentially you have the world and you have giant monsters attacking, and there are these people who operate these giant robots who go to kill said giant monsters. And what you have here is basically the world's under peril from these giant monsters, and they're killing everyone, and they're trying to save the world, and this is kind of sets the background to it. So what you have is kind of like a slightly futuristic world, but one where most of everything's the same, but certain technologies have advanced leaps and bounds ahead of the other in order to keep up with giant said monsters. So what I was doing when I was watching through this is I kind of wanted to look at and analyze the question of how do you keep everything interesting in between the monster fights, between the monsters? Because what you have here is it's a story about giant robots and monsters. So you have to, obviously that's going to be kind of the draw and the providing a lot of the major action and major plot points. But you have to, how do we build up to it? How do we do the characters? How do we space these fights out? And kind of from here. It says, I want you to kind of think of, there's kind of two paths you can kind of go. There's never two paths, but for this, there are two paths. We have Pacific Rim and we have Transformers, basically in two different directions. And Transformers kind of did more or less a continuous fight. It basically is just continuous, constant explosion, fight from the get-go. There's rarely any sort of break. It's just a continual upstream, basically just non-stop fight. With Pacific Rim, what you have is you have a fight in the beginning, and then this kind of lull, and then you have a fight up here towards the end, and then a lull here, and then the fight, and then the climax from there, and the denouement, as we all learned in high school English or thereabouts. And these are the kind of the three fights that make up the bulk of the story. So what you don't have is you don't have this constant reliance on explosions and giant robots for the entirety of it. You are relying on it to some degree, but it's not throughout. So what do you do? Basically, what do you do for the plot? And that's what I kind of wanted to look at and kind of go through from here. So to summarize, for the movie plot, to kind of bring us up into speed and kind of where we're at, is basically the kaiju attacks. There's a voiceover starts introducing the kaiju attacks starting in San Francisco, and what you have is you have these giant monster dinosaur looking things that are like these giant rock skin bodies with these terrible claws, and some of them are like fishes and some of them are like dinosaurs or lizards or something. It's basically kind of like a mix of different things going on for it. But either way, the main point is they are huge and can kill lots of things. So basically, they start invading things. And kaiju, by the way, just equals monster. They start invading things and start showing up out of nowhere and just killing gazillions of people. So the world comes together. Everybody goes, oh snap, puts aside their differences, and they come up with these things called Jaegers. The Jaegers, which equals hunter in German, so what you have is international name scheme for it. But kaiju, because it's harkening back to the class, it's very much inspired by Japanese Godzilla, and of course then Evangelion from there. So you have these giant robots that then fight against the kaijus, and the humans start winning. And we're introducing saying the humans are winning and this is great and everything's really hopeful and everything, and then the voiceover kind of goes, but dun 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 dun, and it's kind of this very ominous. So as the audience, we're kind of introduced to, okay, this is monsters, so not too bad, but wait. And then this is kind of where we get introduced to our main characters. This is kind of an ominous but wait. And now we're sitting here waiting for what's going to happen. We're waiting for the bad thing, whatever is going to go wrong, essentially, for it. We're trying to figure out where exactly everything is going to go wrong. So there's this but wait moment, and then something's attacked off of the coast of I think Sitka, Alaska. No, or just Alaska. I think it's just Alaska. from there. And then basically him and his brother were introduced. His name is Raleigh, and his brother Yancey, and they are Jaeger pilots, and they do this thing called drifting, where their two bodies, two minds are required to pilot the Jaegers, so to split the mental load, basically. One brain is not enough for this, so you're going to have two brains put together to each control one half of the giant robot, basically, from there. And you kind of have it split out the duties from there as far as walking and fighting and throwing fists and rockets and all that kind of stuff from there. So they're going out here. They're given orders to just guard the coast, don't help the boat. But the brothers are kind of this rebellious. They have this fire in them to save as many people as possible. So they go out to fight against this robot, and they're winning and winning and winning. But again, we're waiting for the butt. We're always waiting for it. But then they get the upper hand, but then the monster's dead. And it's like, hooray. But wait, the monster's not dead. The monster comes back, attacks them, kills Yancey. Yancey is super dead. And basically from there, Raleigh does end up killing the monster and gets the Jaeger to shore and then collapses. And then we get this like, 5 years later, basically from here. And so this is kind of like the 5-10 minutes of the show, is we basically have this little intro basically from here where we're trying to set the stage for the rest of the movie, which is that we have these Jaegers, but we're on the back foot. We're losing. We're constantly losing. That's the stage that you're setting from here. But you're breaking into this little mini story to introduce the main character, to get us to like him. He's got a brother. He's got a great relationship. They have this, good repertoire with Tendo. They're bantering. He's funny. He's got all these aspects kind of going on for them from here. And he's trying to save as many people, but then he fails. And again, this is a part where that's kind of a check mark to him to some degree, because he did, he didn't quite fail because he did kill the monster and get the Jaeger back to shore. But there's this idea that he didn't fully succeed in his mission. His brother died basically. So there was this serious loss from here. So this is kind of where we get introduced to everything. We get introduced to this other character who's the boss, who's kind of the marshal, who's kind of in charge of the Jaeger program, who's this kind of very strict order and rules fellow from here. And he's the one who gives them the order not to save anyone else out in the boats or in the shipping boat out there. There's just 10 people because we're worried about the 2 million people on the shore, which again, you understand his point of view because he's a military man in charge of those 2 million lives. There's nobody's going to exchange 10 people for 10 million. You just can't do that. So they start doing that from there. The Raleigh makes it, fights, and then he collapses. And this is kind of 17 minutes in is when he collapses. And this is kind of where it plays the intro music. We get the logo, Pacific Rim, and kind of everything from here. And then we get a cutscene to 5 years later where we're losing Jaegers. Jaegers are dying from there. And basically the program is then we kind of see from the marshal's point of view that the Jaeger program is getting defunded. It is not as successful as it should be. So it goes from there. And then we see everything from Raleigh, who basically is just living as a regular construction worker. He's kind of going back to, just being a normal Joe, basically normal guy from there. He's working construction and kind of going about his way as best he can. He's just living a normal life. He's doing honest work, but not very significant or not very big picture. And the world is bleak. The world is very bleak looking. You're getting this from everything set up. But then it turns out that they're watching on the telly down here, and that everything that what you have is basically they're building this giant wall, but then they watch basically as a giant dinosaur kind of gets through it to the other end, and he's like, hee, made it through, and then a giant explosion, that rocks are going everywhere, and he's about to kill everything. But then it turns out there's this Jaeger that is actually still stationed there, piloted by the Aussie team. And then they actually end up stopping it to keep it from a bunch of people from actually dying from there, because you don't want a bunch of people dying now, do you? From there, and it's led by the Aussie team. So we're kind of introduced to the other teams. The marshal comes and says, hey, world's going to end. We need you. I got a new Mark 3 ship to pilot, or Jaeger to pilot, which is actually his old one, because he said, hey, all the others are dead. I need you to pilot it. You're the only one with experience, and you're the only one alive, so you need to do this for me. And so he ends up going. So he joins back up with them after all this, because he's like, the world's going to end, and I have a plan to end this. war with the Kaijus once and for all. So we're kind of going from here. So again, what we're doing as far as the audience is, again, think about this way. This is this first 17 minutes that we kind of covered right here. We've got this huge lapse here until the next fight. And this is what I want you guys to kind of think of in terms of when you're writing a story where, you know, if you want the movie to be a success, especially if you're doing these big disaster movies or this big, gimmick movie, as you want to call it, where it's all about the twist, it's all about the heist, it's all about this, that. You have to get people on the build-up. Because again, the journey is what makes the end, everything from there. So you have to get people fully invested through the entirety of it, or else they're not going to make it to the end and it's just not going to be good. So they want to make it to the end. So what we're going here is they go to Hong Kong, which is the new headquarters basically from here for the Jaeger program, because they're told, like, hey, we'll let you guys operate for a little while. But then this is obviously operating much, much farther than anyone hoped. Somehow the marshals get pulling it all together from here. So from here they go, and there's 4 Jaegers left. These are all that's left is basically a bunch of 3 Chinese triplets who are teaming up for I think Crimson. I actually can't remember any of the names for any of them. Either way, the 3 triplets. There's the 2 Russians basically. We don't really know if they're brother sister or husband wife. I think that's probably looked more like brother sister. Basically, that's what they were. They were kind of designed to be matching from there. And so what you have is basically what you're building off is you have to invest in characters, which is kind of given as far as it goes. We're having to invest in characters. So what do we have to basically take us to the next fight, this kind of build up towards this next fight? So we have one aspect is this guy named the Marshal, our best friend, the Marshal, and he kind of acts as a antagonist, the system, the authority character. Raleigh had some issues with him because this is the guy who ordered them not to save the men at the boat, who he disobeyed, went out there and got his brother killed, basically. So this is kind of what the backstory. But what this does is this character allows you to have an antagonist of sorts to stand up against the main character for him to clash against. That's not a Jaeger. So that way you don't have to justify or have this. You can have these smaller fights, these smaller emotional fights, basically, that then lead to a build-up before the actual big fight from there. This is kind of what you're thinking of. Then we got the Marshal. We got this lady named Mako Mori. She is the kind of one of the lead people, the lead brain people with the system as well. There's immediately some sort of tension, sexual tension, romantic tension, disagreement sort of kind of between her and Raleigh, where there's this kind of shared interest between the two of them. You don't really know where it's going to go, but there is this interest from here that's kind of in between them from there. And then the next characters that were introduced kind of throughout as everything's unfolded is the Aussie team, which is led by Hercules, I think the guy's name is. They call him Herc, which is a much better name. And Chuck, which is a terrible name, but you know what? Whatever, we'll go with it. Chuck's an asshole. That's his thing. So this is another one of those things. He kind of plays the same role as Draco Malfoy would in Harry Potter, where it kind of gives you a villain, someone to hate, someone to fight against, someone to strive against, while Harry is at school. That's not Voldemort. If you're trying to build up your character to a level 50 boss, you need to have level 5s, level 10s, level 15 bosses, basically like that, or enemies that are this smaller level, and they have to fit within the plot. So what do? You have people who you can't kill, they're your allies, but people who are still you want to fight. So this is what you're building. So these are kind of a lot of the main characters that are building up from here. We also have the whole scientist plot line. There's basically 2 scientists. One of them is trying to plot out predictive models as far as when they are going to attack from here, and he's kind of the nerd scientist as far as the numbers guy. And then there's the other guy who's the bio guy, who's Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He's trying to figure this out, and he loves them. He wants to learn all about them and figure them out and understand them. And so these 2 guys, and what this does is it gives us 2 plot lines to work with with this whole thing. So you can kind of have it weave in and out of each other and kind of use it from there. Again, because what we're doing is we're about to have, I think this whole stretch is like almost an hour, basically, of movie. Because it's kind of a long movie. I think it's basically 2 hours. So what you're going to have is we have to figure out what we're going to do with this 1 hour long stretch. Because this is about, we'll say 20 minutes. I think it's more like 18, 17, but we'll say 20 minutes. And this one's basically about an hour from here. So we have to do this whole build up before the next real fight. I know there's some other fights and they kind of show you some action and stuff like that. But before we really get the main big fight, you have to have this build up. And this is where we're doing the characters. This is where you're doing backstory. This is where you're doing, character dynamics. You're doing hopes, fears. Again, the way you want to think of this is kind of, you want to have something to run away from and something to run towards. This is kind of how you want to have the backbone for every sort of aspect, where basically the audience is hoping that we end up here, but we could wind up here. So, you don't just want a good ending to strive towards. You want a bad ending to get away from. And this kind of adds stakes. The more you care about the characters, the more the stakes, basically, from there. And so this is what it is. And then from there, once Raleigh is kind of in Hong Kong, he's kind of introduced, we're introducing all these characters. There's kind of this tension going on because the marshal, won't tell him the plan. The marshal wants him to follow orders. I got this figured out. There's this relationship with Mako where, hey, maybe there's something there. We don't know, but she's kind of hidden. She's really smart. She's really talented. She kind of calls him out. She says, you're reckless, basically. You get people killed. I'm not really sure you're the man for the job. So he kind of has this aspect of, I've got to prove myself. Because again, we don't really care what the marshal thinks, but we do care what Mako thinks. Because there's this new relationship, this new thing. We don't want to let her down. We want to go from there. And then also we have this guy, Chuck, who's, again, as I said, he's the asshole. And so you don't want to let him be right. So basically from there, Raleigh, we'll put Raleigh here. You don't want to let him be right. So you have all these little conflicts and all these little character aspects that are building up towards it. And then, of course, we have the marshal as well from here. And all of these character dynamics are playing off each other, where the marshal doesn't want Mako to become a pilot. She wants to be a pilot. Raleigh wants Mako to be his co-pilot because, again, his brother died, so he needs somebody else to drift with, share this mind sharing of the load to carry and operate these robots and all from there. And so he wants to do all of this aspect for it. So we have all of these things are in play that kind of have to go forward with each other, that these are kind of going about, and all of these dynamics are working off of each other. And what you're doing is you're setting up this little bitty fights, little bitty encounters, little bitty fights, because it's building from there. And this is what you're doing. You're kind of building again towards this big aspect. And that's where you can kind of see it begin to kind of play out. You can see these relationships kind of start to clash, and you get to build. You also get to know the characters more, because again, we always need to be sold on the characters. We need to be sold on their development. So basically, but you have this aspect of, this is their past, this is what they're doing. Raleigh's trying to live with the decision that he killed his brother. He feels like he killed his brother. He has all this guilt, basically, that he's carrying around with him, and he wants to do better, and he wants to save the world. He wants to build a different world, a world where his brother didn't have to die. So you have this past aspect, and then this is a future. Maybe we want a future with Mako, perhaps, something like that. We want a future where there is all this aspect. You want this potential, and this is kind of what you want to continually build towards. But you have to be able to have time, and this is kind of the main thing. How do you make this interesting in between robot fights? Because again, Transformers is just continuous explosions and fights. This is the joke with Michael Bay, is just that everything's explosions, everything's fighting. And I just didn't care. I was not a biggest fan of those movies. I understood kind of why people liked them. Maybe I would enjoy them more if I, watched them again or something like that. But I got bored. I got really tired of it. I was like, man, more explosions? Great. That was it. That was all it was. It didn't do anything more because we didn't have this emotional charging. I've talked about this. How do you make fights? This is what Naruto does really, really well, is it emotionally charges these fights. So you don't just want somebody to win. You want them to really want them to win. The Naruto versus Pain is an amazing example. The Naruto versus Sasuke is a great example. You want Sasuke to come home, bam. You want Naruto to win the fight. You want Naruto versus Gaara. You want to save the Leaf Village, bam, from there. You have all these emotional charging, but all you need is this time. And again, Naruto's another great example because of all the training arcs. You have all this time to prep and stew and stew and stew all of these aspects that are going into it. You really want to see how this whole thing is going to play together, how this whole thing is going to come together. And so what you have here is we're building up towards, and then they decide to do what's called a test, because it turns out that they have this little fight before the test. And basically this fight where it's more or less it's a combat sort of to see if people are in sequence basically for the drift. And it turns out that Raleigh's not compatible with anyone. But then he challenges Mako, and the marshal says, no, you can't fight. And then he goes, why? Are you scared? There's this kind of taunt back and forth. Again, building off this antagonism. This is kind of like the jerk dad, basically. Marshall's playing that role of the dad, and Raleigh's kind of playing the younger kid. This age gap, there's this different dynamic of, all these different ways from there where you have this dynamic coming into play. The marshal bites, takes the bite or whatever, he gives in, or maybe this is planned all along. You don't really know. So him and Mako basically go and they fight against each other, and it turns out she's really good. So you have this building respect. We care what she thinks. We want to see what's happening. We want her to succeed from there. And you have Mako versus Raleigh, and it turns out they're very compatible and very good. So they decide that they should be the fight, and the marshal says, no, I will pick go home. And again, we're building off this relationship of this aspect and then you can see where he's like, hey, don't you really want to be a pilot? And she's like, listen, the marshal said no. I'd have deep respect for him. I'm not going to do it. I will do as requested because I respect him. And you have this kind of whole unfairness of the situation because again, all this stuff is falling apart in the world. They have to be able to work together for this. And this is kind of what they're fighting for, is this aspect. But again, the marshal's like, no, I will make the decision. So Raleigh shows up and says, he's told, I will pick out your partner, show up to the test from here. And I go over to a clean spot. And so what the test does is basically we're going to test drift compatibility. We're going to try moving. We're just going to fire everything up from here. And it turns out it is Mako. So you have this kind of reveal of, oh, great, there's this relief from the audience that it is Mako. And we can kind of continually build upward, basically from here. We can kind of continually work towards something. We are succeeding. We now have Mako because again, we respect her as the audience. She's smart. She's capable. She, calls Raleigh up for his BS. All this kind of aspect from here. They're comboing together, but then it turns out it goes disastrously wrong. She is not ready for it from here. And again, what we're doing is building tension. You have the hopes and dreams, and then they come crashing down from here. And then you have this great moment, this great fight, really energizing and kind of powder kegging it. For what it is then Chuck goes, hey, this test run was so bad. These two people are the worst. They suck so much. I don't want them anywhere near me. They're horrible. Marshall tells him to shut up. Hurt tells him to shut up. And he comes out, and there's this, basically he goads Raleigh, calling them names, insulting Mako, this kind of bullying attitude where he says, you're going to ruin everything. Go back to the nothing you came from, you squib, basically. From there, again, channeling that Malfoy energy, J.K. Rowling does this great job with Quidditch. Why do we care about Quidditch? Because we hate Malfoy. That's it. Also, people who like sports will probably like it, but we just hate Malfoy that much. That's why we care about Quidditch from there. So he's going to ruin everything, and then they get in a fight, and Raleigh punches him in the face a few times, and then it kind of collapses from there. And then we have this kind of lull where everything kind of splits off, and we're trying to pick up the pieces from here. And this is, again, but you have this like relishment of Chuck saying, see, I told you, you'd never become anything. You're nothing. This kind of continuous clash going on from here because we want our characters to succeed because we want them to do well. But then also you have the goading taunts of Chuck over here, and we want them to succeed. So you kind of have this push-pull. This is what we're going towards. This is what we're pushing against. This is what you're moving towards. The tension that you're building for your characters. All about this tension here. And what it's building towards is then suddenly it's announced there's a new cataclysmic, I think they call them category. Yeah, category 4 attack, or category 5. Yeah, category 4, I think. Category 4 attack, basically. And there's 2 of them. So there's two of them. So basically they send out, I think, is it Crimson Typhoon? Maybe that's what it is, Crimson Typhoon. They send out the two robots, all three robots, the Mark III. So Raleigh and Mako are told you have to stay shore because you guys suck, obviously. They're not told that, but they're like, hey, you know, I kind of just failed miserably. Sit tight, don't move from there. So they're going from there. But basically, that's these three guys from here, and they start fighting. And this is where we get to here, basically. We start building up to this point. Or it's more like here or something like that. This is the second fight for the whole thing. Again, we've gone like an hour, and this is what it's building towards. Building to have us care. And then it turns out the three other Jaegers start running into trouble, and one of them dies. The Russians get taken down. The three brothers get taken down. And then what it is, and so again, you have this moment where you want the characters to succeed, but you want them even more. You want them to prove Chuck wrong. You want them to succeed. You want them to prove it to themselves. Do it for Mako's past. Do it for what they want. Do it for hopes and dreams. And then they come out and save the day. And it's this great moment. And of course, and then it goes on to kind of the final fight from the ending. But again, this is kind of the big section, because if you can get an audience an hour and 30 minutes into your movie, I think you're doing pretty good. You basically got them the rest of it from there. So, yeah, and that kind of gets us to where the main point I want to highlight, which is basically filling in this nice middle section from here. You know, what are you going to do at this point? What are you going to do in between this section here from there? How are you going to get the audience from there to there? How are you going to build up all this moment with a giant robot movie and have most of the movie not have giant robot fights? How do you do that? What is important to pack it in there from there? So, yeah, I think that covers everything. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one.